Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, 8 times since 1974, when Congress created the rescissions process, one party has controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. 8 times. It's actually 4 times Democratic control and 4 times Republican control. 8 times one party had total control over the elements of the federal government necessary to pass legislation. And never before has either party done what Republicans are doing today: pass a partisan rescissions bill, double-crossing the minority party and canceling spending that just months before both parties shook hands on. Why? Why has this never happened before? Well, because this is just an old-fashioned double cross.
Tonight, in the heart of the Senate chamber, the debate takes a dramatic turn. Senator Murphy delivers a fiery warning against what he calls a double cross, accusing Republicans of breaking faith with bipartisan agreements and endangering America's global leadership. This is not just another budget fight. It's a battle over trust, power, and the future of U.S. influence in a world where China and Russia are waiting to take America's place. Stay tuned, because what you're about to hear could reshape how America governs at home and competes abroad.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, 8 times since 1974, when Congress created the rescissions process, one party has controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. 8 times. It's actually 4 times Democratic control and 4 times Republican control. 8 times one party had total control over the elements of the federal government necessary to pass legislation. And never before has either party done what Republicans are doing today: pass a partisan rescissions bill, double-crossing the minority party and canceling spending that just months before both parties shook hands on. Why? Why has this never happened before? Well, because this is just an old-fashioned double cross. It's a con job. Republicans and Democrats agreed on spending levels. First, in a bipartisan appropriations bill passed in March of 2023, and then again in multiple bipartisan continuing resolutions. When a party controls the White House and both houses of Congress, it always has the power to use the rescissions process to pull a fast one, to agree with the minority party on a budget, because the rules say that you need 60 votes to pass a budget, to get majority party priorities funded in exchange for funding minority party priorities, and then to use the rescissions process to just double-cross the minority by using that process, which only requires 50 votes, to just then cancel the minority party's priorities. That's immoral. It's unethical. Suckering your partner into a deal in which you get something and they get something, and then using the back door to cancel the part of the deal that you don't like. That's bad faith. It's why no party has done it since 1972. The power has always existed. 8 different times, either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party could have cut a bipartisan spending deal and then used the rescissions power to just cancel the parts of the deal they don't like, but it's never happened because it's bad faith, because it destroys the ability of the Senate to function in a bipartisan way. It's kind of like if you traded baseball cards as a kid, and you made a trade with your best friend, and then in the middle of the night you snuck into his house and you took your cards back so that you had his cards, and now you had your cards as well. Nobody would think that's right. But that's exactly what's happening here. It will become hard maybe even impossible, and Senator Tillis laid this out very well, to write a bipartisan budget ever again, because the minority party now knows that they can get double-crossed. And believe me, if Republicans do this now, Democrats are going to do it when they're in charge. This will become the norm. Sit down, do a bipartisan deal, wink, wink, and then a couple months later, just cancel the agreement through a partisan rescissions process. And of course, this is now the third time in 7 short months that the new Republican majority has made substantial, meaningful changes to Senate rules and norms. Senate Republicans created a brand new rule that massively expands their ability to invalidate actions of the previous Democratic administration. Just a couple weeks ago, Republicans walked away from decades of precedent on how Senate bills are scored, and they used new magic math to create a score that hid the actual cost of their budget bill. And now this double cross. But, Mr. President, this isn't just about breaking the Senate. That's actually probably the least serious consequence of what is happening here. The most serious consequence is what is happening to American power around the world, as Donald Trump and Republicans, in part through this rescissions bill, destroy every single non-military tool that we use around the world to protect our interests. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, I collected G.I. Joe figures, and one Christmas, I remember being so excited because Santa Claus brought me the huge G.I. Joe aircraft carrier. It was awesome. I was obsessed with the military, like a lot of boys that age, the planes, the tanks, the ships. That's what I thought American power was, the U.S. military, period, stop. And of course, that's an 8-year-old view of the world. The world, as it turns out, is a lot more complicated. You need a lot more than just planes and tanks and ships to protect your interests. You need a powerful military. But adults, in particular adults who have any experience in national security, know that the octopus of global power has a lot of arms. Military might, but also information might, economic might, diplomatic might, energy might, humanitarian might. This revisions bill cancels billions of dollars in investments in non-military foreign policy tools. And it is part of a broader effort by the Trump administration to destroy almost every tool that protects American interests other than our military. Over the last 10 years, the defense budget has grown from about $502 billion to $825 billion. That's an extraordinary 10-year increase of about $323 billion. Over that same period of time, the State Department budget has grown from $54 billion to $56 billion, a $2 billion increase. Now, if you layer in emergency funds, that increase is more like $30 billion, but you are still talking about an increase for the military over the past 10 years that is 10 times the size of the increase for non-military tools. And this military myopia, it makes me remember my 8-year-old self, because it is so childish, it's so immature, it is so divorced from reality. Donald Trump's national security strategy, fund the military and destroy every other way that we confront Russia, China, Iran, non-state actors, it could have been constructed by an 8-year-old. It's that unsophisticated, and it really amounts to surrender. Because as we stop projecting non-military power around the world, China and Russia, but especially China, they just celebrate and step into the void. Secretary Rubio announced on March 10th that 83% of USAID programs would be terminated. Meanwhile, China just announced an 8.4% increase in its own diplomatic budget for 2025, committing $500 million additional dollars to the World Health Organization over the next 5 years. An organization that the United States no longer belongs to. As a result of our cuts, standing next to China's investments in diplomatic power, China will surpass the United States this year for the first time as the largest bilateral assistance partner for 40 countries. China is now the power at the World Health Organization. They call the shots about the standards of global health and pandemic relief. China is now the preferred economic development partner for many nations. China is now the dominant force in standard-setting boards for global commerce. This is a choice the Trump administration is making to make China, and to a certain extent Russia in certain forums, the dominant power when it comes to economic statecraft, information statecraft, energy statecraft. Let me give you a specific example. Today, information is power. If you control information flows, man, you control politics, you control economics, you control culture. China spends about $7 billion a year to promote their communist narrative, to undermine U.S. leadership around the world and foster a China-friendly media environment globally. Russia, it's really hard to know how much Russia spends because they're not publicly reporting much of it, but they certainly spend at least $1.5 billion, but probably double that. And in many countries, Russia and China just control the information space. Russian-backed candidates win elections in countries on their periphery simply because of Russian information programs. Asian countries box the United States and U.S. companies out of economic competition because of Chinese information programs. And so, faced with China and Russia spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 billion, when the United States today is spending only a fraction of that amount of money, it would stand to reason that this would be a moment where we should come together, Republicans and Democrats, and dramatically increase our information warfare investments. But of course, we're doing exactly the opposite. Trump is in the middle of a purposeful, relentless campaign to destroy America's global information power. The Trump administration just shut down the Global Engagement Center. That is the capacity at the State Department to try to counter Russian and Chinese propaganda around the world. Gone. Just gone. Global Engagement Center. Bipartisan commitment. Set up years ago by myself and Rob Portman, supported by Marco Rubio when he was a senator, now just doesn't exist any longer. The administration is dismantling the U.S. Agency for Global Media. That's the umbrella arm that oversees our information programs around the world. They laid off 92% of its staff. Voice of America, the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, they are on track to disappear. The arm of the VOA that combats Iranian anti-American information, gone. 54 different radio frequencies operated by Radio Free Asia to counter Chinese anti-American propaganda, gone. At the same time, China is opening up 80 new radio frequencies in multiple languages, including in those regions where America is disappearing. We are handing the world to China and Russia by deciding to view American power only through a military lens. And this rescissions bill makes it worse by enacting billions of dollars of cuts to diplomacy, to economic development programs, likely to information programs, because we actually can't see the impact of all of these cuts. It's all surrender. China is throwing a blowout party as we disappear our non-military power from the world. Trump terminated tens of millions of dollars in projects to upgrade Africa's power grid. What did China do? They announced $50 billion of new financing for Africa. Africa, a place where the critical minerals exist to power AI and future defense systems. Africa, the part of the world whose economy is going to explode with opportunity, now opportunity that will go to Chinese companies, not American companies, as we withdraw our relationships with that continent as China steps into the breach. This revisions bill, standing next to Trump's destruction of all of our non-military foreign policy tools, is surrender to our enemies. This bill is a double cross. It is. It's a double cross. It's going to harm our ability to ever be able to do a bipartisan budget process in the future. But even worse, this bill is surrender to our adversaries who are chomping at the bit to fill the void that we are creating by adopting the national security strategy of an 8-year-old boy.
Mr. President, colleagues, citizens who follow the debates of this chamber, and anyone concerned with the trajectory of American governance, we find ourselves in a moment that demands not silence, not polite acquiescence, but vigorous discussion about what it means to govern responsibly, to hold faith with one another, and to defend the credibility of our nation in a world that does not wait for us to get our house in order. What we are debating today, though it may seem on its surface like another technical budgetary maneuver, goes much deeper. It touches the very bedrock of trust upon which democratic institutions rest, and it has implications that extend far beyond the immediate votes and headlines. To understand the weight of this issue, we must explore not just the mechanics of rescissions or the procedural traditions of the Senate, but the broader question of what happens when agreements lose their meaning, when promises are treated as temporary, and when partisan expedience outweighs the need for continuity in governance. The rescissions process was created decades ago as a safeguard, a limited tool to correct obvious excess or to reclaim funds that no longer served their intended purpose. In theory, it exists to ensure fiscal responsibility, but like many tools in politics, it can be wielded responsibly or abused recklessly. For half a century, neither party dared to wield it in the way it is being deployed now, as a backdoor to strip away the very priorities that were negotiated and agreed upon in good faith during bipartisan budgeting. For 50 years, through Republican control and Democratic control, this tool remained untouched as a partisan weapon. That restraint was not because either party lacked the imagination to try it, but because both understood that the integrity of agreements is what makes governing possible. You cannot negotiate with a partner if you believe they will later nullify the deal through procedural tricks. You cannot have bipartisan budgeting if one side treats the final handshake as a temporary pause before the knife comes out. Trust, once lost, is not easily regained. And here we must linger, because trust is not just a lofty ideal. It is the glue that allows institutions to function. Without it, even the most sophisticated rules and procedures collapse into dysfunction. Imagine two parties trying to build a house together. They agree, one will lay the foundation, the other will construct the frame. But after the foundation is laid, the second party sneaks in at night and digs up the concrete. When morning comes, how can the first party possibly continue? They know their partner will sabotage the work. That is what happens when rescissions are abused in this way. The minority party will know that any concession they win can be stolen back, and the majority will know they can erase compromises whenever it suits them. The result is paralysis, endless gridlock, and a Senate stripped of its capacity to craft lasting solutions. And this chamber, more than any other, was built on the idea of durability and compromise. The House may swing with political winds, but the Senate was designed as ballast, a slower body where decisions are deliberated and agreements endure. If we abandon that culture, if we normalize double crosses, then the Senate becomes just another battlefield of raw partisan power. Already we see signs of this erosion. In just months, precedents have been broken, norms discarded, and rules bent into shapes that prioritize immediate victory over institutional stability. Once that path is taken, it is hard to return. Each side, when in power, feels justified in pushing further, until nothing is left of the Senate's traditions except hollow rhetoric. Yet this is not only an internal problem. The decisions we make here ripple outward. When we betray trust at home, we weaken our credibility abroad. When we hollow out the tools of diplomacy, development, and global engagement in the name of fiscal restraint or partisan victory, we cede ground to adversaries who have no hesitation in filling the vacuum. Today, that means China and Russia. These are not abstract competitors, they are strategic actors who study our moves carefully and exploit every retreat. When we cut funding for development projects in Africa, Beijing steps in with billions for infrastructure. When we silence our international broadcasters, Moscow floods the information space with propaganda. When we reduce investments in multilateral institutions, others rewrite the rules of global engagement to suit their own interests. This is the broader context that must be understood. The rescissions fight is not simply about accounting. It is about whether America will continue to use the full spectrum of its power, not only military, but diplomatic, informational, cultural, and economic. For decades, American leadership has rested on this multifaceted strength. Yes, our military is unparalleled, but military force alone cannot build alliances, cannot counter disinformation, cannot foster economic growth in fragile regions, cannot win hearts and minds. Diplomacy and development are not luxuries, they are force multipliers. They prevent crises, they build partnerships, they stabilize economies. To cut them is not to save money, but to invite greater costs down the road. Costs paid in instability, in conflicts that require far more expensive military interventions, in diminished influence that cannot be regained easily once lost. Consider the example of health security. For years, U.S. investments in global health helped combat diseases, build resilience, and create goodwill. During the Ebola crisis, American leadership was decisive. But when we cut funding and withdraw from organizations like the World Health Organization, others rush in. China, in particular, has pledged hundreds of millions, not out of altruism, but because they understand influence is built through presence. If the world sees China leading on global health while America retreats, perceptions shift. And perceptions matter. They shape alliances, markets, even security partnerships. Or take the information domain. We live in an age where narratives are as powerful as navies. Russia has perfected the art of disinformation, using it to meddle in elections, to divide societies, to weaken democracies from within. China has invested billions to promote its model, presenting itself as a benevolent power while painting the U.S. as unreliable. Against this backdrop, our decision to gut institutions like the Global Engagement Center or U.S. Agency for Global Media is disastrous. At the very moment our adversaries amplify their voices, we go silent. The result is not neutrality, but defeat. Where America's voice fades, others speak, and their words carry the day. Some argue that military power alone is enough. That as long as our defense budget remains robust, we need not worry about these softer tools. But that view is dangerously simplistic. History teaches us that empires do not fall solely because of military weakness. They falter when their influence wanes, when their alliances crumble, when their values no longer inspire. The Soviet Union collapsed not because its army disappeared, but because its system lost credibility. Rome's legions were mighty, but when its governance faltered and its cohesion dissolved, strength on the battlefield could not save it. For America to make the same mistake, to focus exclusively on military might while neglecting diplomacy and development, is to invite decline. Now let us turn to the issue of cost, for budget hawks will say these cuts are necessary. But the numbers tell a different story. The increases in defense spending dwarf the entire budget for diplomacy and development. Over $200 billion have been added to the Pentagon's budget in a decade, while the State Department and USAID combined operate on less than $50 billion. Even doubling their budgets would be a fraction of defense expenditures. To slash them further does not meaningfully reduce deficits, it simply cripples our ability to act outside the battlefield. It is akin to saving pennies by selling the steering wheel of your car. The short-term gain is meaningless, the long-term cost catastrophic. And yet, here we are, poised to do precisely that. Why? Because partisanship has overtaken prudence. Because scoring a political victory against the other party is seen as more valuable than sustaining America's leadership. Because immediate wins in the headlines are prioritized over enduring strength. That is the tragedy of this moment. It is not merely about money, but about mindset. A mindset that views compromise as weakness, that sees agreements as temporary, that treats norms as obstacles rather than foundations. Let us not pretend the world waits while we indulge in this dysfunction. Beijing does not pause its Belt and Road investments while we fight over rescissions. Moscow does not suspend its disinformation campaigns while we debate norms. Our adversaries are delighted when we sabotage ourselves. Every time we break faith with one another, we weaken the cohesion needed to confront them. Every dollar we cut from diplomacy is a dollar they will spend to expand influence. Every institution we dismantle is a platform they will occupy.
This is why the stakes are so high. It is not just about this bill, but about the signal it sends. To our allies, it signals unreliability. To our adversaries, it signals opportunity. To our citizens, it signals dysfunction. And once signals are sent, they are not easily retracted. Allies may begin to hedge, building ties with others because they doubt our commitments. Adversaries may grow bolder, testing boundaries because they sense weakness. Citizens may lose faith in institutions they see as broken. All of this flows from choices we make here. So what is to be done? First, we must reject the abuse of rescissions as a partisan weapon. The tool must be restored to its original purpose, correcting genuine waste, not undoing negotiated deals. Second, we must recommit to the principle that bipartisan agreements are binding in spirit as well as letter. Without that, compromise becomes impossible. Third, we must recognize that America's strength requires investment in all its instruments of power. Military, yes, but also diplomacy, development, information, and culture. Neglecting any of these weakens the whole. Finally, we must understand that norms matter. They are not inconveniences. They are the scaffolding that holds up our system. To tear them down for temporary gain is to risk collapse. In conclusion, Mr. President, this debate is not merely about a budgetary procedure. It is about who we are as a governing body, who we are as a nation, and what kind of power we will be in the century ahead. We can choose to honor trust, to sustain our tools of influence, to strengthen the Senate as a place of compromise and continuity. Or we can choose the path of betrayal, of short-termism, of surrendering influence to adversaries who will gladly take what we abandon. The choice is ours, but the consequences will be borne not just by us, but by generations to come. So here's the bottom line. This rescissions bill is not thrift. It is betrayal. It is not reform. It is retreat. It is not strength. It is surrender. If America is to remain a trusted partner, a credible power, and a functioning democracy, we must stop this reckless unraveling of bipartisan agreements and recommit to using every tool of influence we have, military and non-military alike. The world is watching. China and Russia are waiting. The question is, will we rise to the moment, or will we give away our future piece by piece?